Dear old U-boat, about time for her to have a revamp. I mean, since I built this boat, I've computerized it, I've done a whole lot of things to it, and it's just got hammered. So, even the gun, which I spent so much time over, had half of it knocked off by the propeller of another boat. So, here we go. Going to remove all the top, going to remove the deck, going to remove this section here, going to revamp this gap between the top and the bottom, going to put all the decks back, going to redo the railings, going to put guns on it, and it's going to look very, very schmick. So I better get to work. So I'm using here a drill, and this is exactly the same drill as I used 2-3 years ago, where I ground down the holder end, because it's high-speed steel, made a punch. I'm now holding it in the drill press, and as you can see in the vise, I've just made a slot which is exactly the right size for this, drawn some lines on this aluminium flashing, and now I'm redoing the slots that are going to go up the side of the boat toward the bow, because they've never been right, and this is my chance to get it right. If you've seen old movies of the boat, you may wonder about that, but in fact this is going to be much better. So here are all the slots now, nicely put into this aluminium flashing. It's not hard to do, and gee, it makes a terrific difference, because one of the things that really looks good about this boat is when the water flows through these open slots. So I've taken the old strips of flashing off, and this is where the new piece is going to go, and actually I'm just using scissors to fit it. And now there's a gap between the top and the bottom of the hull that's grown over time, and I really want to fix it. So this is my age-old method of doing this. I use this on the Nautilus as well. When you scratch build, it's sometimes quite hard to get these gaps exactly right. So this is good old kitchen Glad wrap. I'm just taping it up out of the way so that I can add car filler to the lower half of the boat and get that crack completely filled, knowing as I do this there's going to be no possibility of this also setting onto the top half. So what I do with this is I fill it up as best I can, try not to have much externally, because I'm going to have to sand it down no matter what. And then once I've got it nice and hard, pull it apart. Now this is the piece of the top deck flashing. I've pulled it off, and now I'm just going through the process of straightening it up again. I love aluminium flashing, it does this so easily. Of course it's very easy to bend once you've got it on, and you have to be very careful of it, particularly on decks and so on, but it really works nicely. Now I've pulled off the guardrails around the conning tower, going to redo those, not going to remake them, they're actually quite good, but I've decided I need to refasten them onto these bases which I've planked. And what I do, and you don't see this, is I get a bit of sandpaper and sand back those decks a little bit, because they look very weathered. Oh, and here's the front glued on, by the way. I think that looks extraordinary. I'm very happy with that indeed. And you can see I'm still working now on the gap, and I'll continue to do that until I've got it right. Now what I've done here is I've managed to put a piece of plastic, and I covered the back, both of these decks, with a piece of 1.2mm plastic, and then cut a strip so that it goes around the edge, which wasn't there before. And then externally, and you can't really see this all that easily, I've used aluminium flashing to give a vertical piece to the decks. Makes it look much, much better. And what I'm doing here is exactly how I put them together in the first place, is I'm using some tool steel against the middle rail, and I'm just gluing these into place. So once I've got them all nicely set up, you can see here I've got some epoxy. I'm just going to, it's a bit like tack welding, I'm just going to touch the appropriate spots where it's meeting nicely. Now you can see a bit of this guardrail that's not even touching the deck. I think you could see that on the starboard stern side. The surprising thing is, even though that is the case, no one ever seems to notice it, especially after I put the mesh back around that lower part of the rails, which will be just plain fly screen. So here I've just tacked them up and they're going to be fine. Now I'm obviously putting on a new strip along the front. This time I'm using some black plastic, and now you can see I'm doing the same with the lower deck of the conning tower, just getting that right. And I'm just going through exactly the same process, and you can see there I've used a couple of 90-degree set squares just to make sure that I've got that nicely square as well and pushed together. So it's a bit of a process, and I needed a bit of extra light, clearly, but I'm pretty happy in the end with how this comes out as well. Now gluing the top deck back in place using appropriate weights, and this is the it's like a splash rail that runs down the side of the front of the hull. In fact, it's not really as big as this, but I decided to make this a bit of a feature. And so I'm using HO railway line, and to fasten it on there, I'm just fastening on a piece of wire strip using silver solder. And as you can see here, an enormous amount of flux, and that will fry away. And once I've done that, I just cut them down to size, and you can see one just on the right hand side there, and drill holes in the side of the boat and fasten them to the boat, because they look pretty stunning. And it's one of those things that if you get that on there and looking right, it's really quite a stunningly attractive eye catcher. So there we go, there are my HO railway lines. I've now stuck them onto the side of the hull. The hull has a particularly metallic look. Now I'm using here some string, some very fine string, because there's a thick bead of weld that runs around the pressure hull. And once again, I have decided that I'm going to make this a bit of a standout feature. Now to do that, I've just run a bit of super glue, as you can see, along the string, and I'm just taking this in sections. I'm just getting it right, using some tape as I go. This is probably the hardest part just here, and of course lovely super glue sticks to your fingers like mad, but I'm just going along here and just taking this in sections, and as I go then gluing it on, and as you can see, it's coming along very nicely. This was just a bit of an idea that I had, and I thought this might achieve this purpose quite well. You don't have a lot of time to play with super glue, but even if it isn't right, I can re-glue it at any point in time just to get this right. There's an S shape here that I want to try and achieve, and it's not wonderful, but as you can see, that wasn't too bad. And because it's glued, I'm just showing you here the thickness of this string. Because it's glued, now I can work from that last piece, and I've got a straight bit here, so I'm just going to stretch that out and then let that set before I do the final bit. But you can see doing that is actually quite an effective way of getting a nice thick effect. And I'm going to do the same for the ballast tanks. As you can see, I've got all my weights holding the deck down, and I've tacked those bits of string to the top of the ballast tank in every case. The bits of string are now completely loose, and the idea is I'm going to go string by string, going to use the super glue on them, and one by one stick them in place. You can hear a helicopter going over there. But you don't need me to talk right now. So I just added a bit more super glue and then used my finger just to get it down. Over time, your fingers seem to build up a bit of super glue, and you have to take some care about getting it off. think it's rather ironic that such a useful glue has such a propensity to stick flesh rather than what you're actually trying to stick. But you can see just running that onto the piece of string. Then once that is stuck, I'll cut off those extra lengths at the bottom. And then I'm just going to make sure it's all nicely and firmly in place, and then I'll paint them. That's it. I'm just doing this by eye. That's good enough. The beauty of these is that they very clearly designate this as the tanks on the side of the boat. But when the boat moves slowly through still water, they cause the most lovely ripples. And when I thought I would rebuild the boat or redo the boat as I'm doing it now, I thought originally I might get rid of these. But in fact, I really like them. I think they look stunning.